Our next guest runs a cyber risk management firm and says no technical controls can adequately protect US user data so long as TikTok remains Chinese-owned. Silogen's CEO, Karim Hijazi, joins us now from Houston. Karim, great to have you with us. Is this a fight that TikTok CEO simply cannot win at this point?
I think so. He floundered during a lot of this. As eloquent as he presented his case, I think the truth is that at the end of the day, if the data is being collected in any server effectively where Chinese employees, or more specifically any government oversight on those employees or directly of that server or data is available, there's just no winning this argument. The fact of the matter is that he keeps claiming he's seen no evidence of this or that. There's already an investigation going on about U.S. information being viewed or being used in some capacity by Chinese employees in China. And so unfortunately, he's backed himself in a corner because I think that, quite frankly, he can't flagrantly suggest that it's impossible. He does back off that throughout the course of the testimony. But I think at the end of the day, there's a no win on that one. He's going to have to admit that if there's an oversight of some kind, and going so far as to saying that the Chinese government has to approve a forced sale, he's sort of digging his own grave there, in my opinion.
And this sort of, as you point out, in between a rock and a hard place, right? Because if you say that only US ownership will solve not even all the problems at TikTok, right? That's not even talking about the other problems that were raised during this hearing, mental health, the rising crime and all of these things that have been kind of pegged to the rise of TikTok. But even if this deal is agreed to for the US side, do you see Beijing being amenable to it?
No. Within the community that I'm part of, and many others are that have watched this manifest over years and multiple administrations at this point, and this is just one example of an organization that happens to have Chinese origins. There are many other organizations that have Chinese investment in them with similar challenges. This one just is extremely pungent because of the nature of the organization to begin with. At the end of the day, if there is indeed, to your point, a U.S. ownership of the data and total control, so to speak, of it, the tactics change. It's simply that now there's an incursion into those environments by hackers to essentially collect the same kind of thing. Right now, it's just really no need to do anything illicitly because it's available. But the minute that the status changes to where it's now something that's protected, they'll just shift the tactics to trying to grab it illicitly. And I think that we've watched this happen with other organizations where they've implanted people within them, whether they're American or Chinese owned. So I don't see I don't see anything to your point about being complicit. I don't think the Chinese are going to give in on their information and intelligence collection apparatus that they have, of which TikTok is hugely powerful at the moment.
Karim, forgive me if this is a naive question, but 150 million Americans have already downloaded TikTok. Isn't it too late? Does TikTok need real-time information or something?
It's a really good question because I do think arguably it's too late from a completely different perspective, which is that now it's going to be defended, as we saw with some of the protests outside, with people saying, don't delete it. We like it. We're using it. Influencers are making an incredible amount of money with it. The advertising utility of it's been incredibly powerful. We watched this whole thing manifest. I even commented on this topic when Donald Trump was pushing for this agenda. Now it's a different administration. But now it's bigger, to your point. There's even more people on it. It's loved by the general population that uses it. It's only the few that sort of know the underpinnings of how this works. And I think to answer your question more specifically, intelligence collection is an ongoing effort. So as much as there may have been a very good haul of information that they've already gotten, there's always more to be had. There's always new users to get. There's always new locations that they can get availability to with new users coming on board, which is going to be valuable to them. So I don't think there's ever really an end to intelligence collection. And this, again, represents an incredible utility they just don't want to give up.
So they've offered $1.5 billion of an investment that would be a US-based investment in data security to try and appease lawmakers. And by the way, this would also prevent a ripple effect where, other Chinese apps would have to leave the country, et cetera, et cetera. Would that not be enough? $1.5 billion sounds like a lot.
A lot, $1.5 billion is a lot by any standards in terms of financial, perspective. However, if you think about how much money has been thrown at critical infrastructure within the U.S. and other countries. It's been way more than that, and it's still not serving. It's not giving us the coverage we need to protect ourselves from these types of adversaries. Again, we're talking about a nation-state apparatus in China that would be working to get into these environments if indeed they were closed off to them. And you can throw as much money as you want on it until there's a fundamental shift in terms of mentality around security and privacy and the way that these nation-state actors work, where they're social engineering their ways into things. That takes no money. That just takes a really well-crafted message to get into these environments, or bribery, as we've seen with some of the Twitter situations in the past. So unfortunately, I wish I could tell you that money was the ultimate solution to these problems. It's just not. It's going to be time, training, and experience that unfortunately gets us there.
Karim, if there is, in fact, a ban, who stands to benefit the most? You talked about the huge amount that influencers have stand to lose and their audiences, right? Would it be Meta? Would it be Alphabet?
It's a great question. I think that fundamentally, if you look at it, and this is sort of a layperson's view of the app as a tool, Instagram, Meta is probably the biggest winner in the mix. They tend to be the most likely alternative to the exact same utility that TikTok offers. Then again, I think that people tend to be very loyal to their respective platforms, a little bit like, Spotify versus someone else using something. They tend to just like what it is, but they will win. I mean, I think that the U.S. social media giants will take advantage of the situation. There will be an outcry because a lot of people's businesses and livelihoods and many people's jobs depend on this application, to be perfectly fair. And it's a tough situation because this is a national security issue that doesn't necessarily translate down to a general population that only cares about what they're making financially. So I respect their opinion. However, on a greater, more sort of dark, shadowy underground, this is a hugely problematic issue that I don't think is going to get any better the longer this thing perpetuates. And the more there's pressure on TikTok, the more I think they're going to probably be a little bit more smash and grab about the intelligence collection. They may actually get more aggressive with it if they know they're going to lose it.
All right, Karim, looking forward to that day. That is Silogen's CEO, Karim Hijazi, joining us there. Plenty more to come right here on Daybreak Australia. This is Bloomberg.